Good morning and welcome to Sunday Story Hour, where we share real stories of how human design has helped our guests know themselves on a deep, transformative level. By knowing and trusting ourselves, we develop deeper, more honest relationships and unlock our true gifts. I'm Kathy Bashanko, and my guest this week is Kim Gould. Kim is she's a 5-1 emotional generator, left angle cross of demands, and if you know her, you know her. And I am a huge fan, and I love your blog post. The first time my sister sent me one of your blogs, I told her, I feel like I just took a college course. And because I am, and she's a manifesting generator, so she just skims it or whatever. But I would click every link and then read every link in that link. And I'm like, I learned so much in every one of your things, and they are just mind-blowing to me. So welcome. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thanks, Kathy. And you're my favorite reader if you're clicking all the links. So thank you.
Yes, I love them. So so that's probably good for your algorithms too, or something, right? So and I would love to just start out by having you tell us and tell everyone how you found human design, or how it found you, and what that meant for you at that time, if you just don't mind getting right into the story.
Yeah, sure. So I was a lawyer. I used to be a lawyer, and then I got very unwell for quite a few years. And I started to get better, and I was looking for something, and I was kind of doing all these training courses and feeling, it's great because people come to me now and they're like, I need to know what I have to do. And I remember what it was like for me back then, trying all these things and getting more and more frustrated that I just couldn't find the right thing. And then I saw an image of, in a US magazine that I was doing some writing for, an image of the mandala, the human design mandala. And I was like, so many people do, I think, like, that's it. So I had to kind of, search around back then, because there was no kind of interactive web the way we have now. We had email, but we didn't have things like Skype or Facebook or anything like that back then. It was 2003. So someone put me in contact with Zeno Dixon, who unfortunately has passed now, but she sent me in the mail a package with her training course, which I've still got the folders here, and I don't know, maybe 20 training CDs. So I worked through that really quickly, just like couldn't get enough of it. And then basically she mentored me for years. She didn't like everything I did. She certainly didn't like when I went off track into all the areas that I went into, but she was a very technical, she had an incredible technical skill of understanding the human design chart and how it was put together. And I'm incredibly thankful for her in teaching me that. She was the person who actually first sponsored Ra to come to the US back in 1992. Zeno Dixon.
Okay, yeah, I think I've heard.
Unfortunately, she got really unwell, and we lost her way too soon, unfortunately. But we used to have lots of amazing conversations. So that's how I found it.
When you were physically unwell, is what you were saying? You were at a point where you were physically unwell, or was it more of a
oh no, yeah, physically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how did this knowledge impact you? Or obviously you really got into it, but what was it about it that spoke to you?
I think two things. One was the whole kind of generator idea, right? So I realized how I was pushing all the time. And so just to have that permission to sit back and wait. And Zena used to pick it up all the time. She'd say to me, Kim, you're trying to initiate again. I was like, oh, okay, you're right. But it kind of terrified me not to. It took me ages actually to stop trying to push things and make them happen all the time. So that really helped a lot with my recovery. On my Saturn return, so when I was 28, I got chronic fatigue syndrome. I was in bed for 3 years. I was seriously, really, really ill at the time. So this was kind of 10 years after that. I still had some symptoms, but that really helped me to get really much, much better. The other thing as well was that a few years previous to that, I'd just been like like I didn't even know anything about anything spiritual at all. And it was such an interesting time for me to realize what I had access to. And human design, you know, I just knew it straight away. It was almost like I didn't have to learn it. I just knew it straight away. And it really helped me to access, it gave me a tool to know what I knew, in a sense.
Okay.
It as soon as I started speaking from a human design perspective, it was like everything made sense for me.
Okay, I can relate to that. Yeah, I was just thinking about that in a sense earlier this morning when I was thinking about how, you know, even if you didn't know your human design chart, to just learn the energy of the gates and how those archetypes affect us, right, would have a huge impact, right? Like if you had no way to know, like you didn't know you were even born, right? You could just learn the energy of the gates and look for where you're expressing the low end and try to, that would have an impact. But yeah, so.
Well, gene keys, but also
Right.
I do a lot of work with the I Ching, and you know, one of the projects that we played with for a month was for people just to go and do I Ching readings,
Right.
and that was incredible because the gate. Some people might not know, but the gates are based on the I Ching hexagram. So it was just an incredible experience for people in my community to be just playing with the I Ching kind of separate from their human design, to see how the I Ching informs their human design.
Yeah, they really layer together. So now you started with a pretty traditional entry into human design. It sounds like you were given a very traditional human design education there, but you kind of veered way off with how you did it. I'm wondering how that, if you can kind of talk about that a little bit.
Again, kind of two things. One, how I'm going to say we generally, how we did human design back then is quite different to how it's done now. There weren't anywhere near the kinds of what I would call bells and whistles and add-ons, and you know, a lot of stuff that people think is, for me, like when I look, I think you're missing the kind of that you're missing the heart, in a sense, of human design, and looking at all of these extra things. You know, looking at the environment and the colors and the quarters and all of that kind of stuff. Whereas what we were more doing back then was actually reading the chart. And to me, that's kind of a bit of a lost art now, for people to actually be able to read the chart, as opposed to, you know, explore all of these, you know, kind of fun stuff that comes out of human design. So it wasn't, I think if people think about it as being a traditional education, they would think it was something different to what it actually was, which was a very technical understanding of how the chart operates. So what happened was, that was 2003. Then in 2004, I started doing some readings, put my website up in 2004, Love Your Design. And then in 2005, something really amazing happened. They started to discover planets out past Pluto. And this was like, just, it rocked the astronomical and astrological community, because until then, Pluto had been the end of our solar system. And suddenly there were all these other planets. And I was thinking, well, we can put those into the human design chart. So as these other planets were getting discovered, Haumea, Makemake, Eris and Sedna are the main ones that people may have heard of. So they're in our solar system, but Sedna, for example, has a 12,000-year orbit. Pluto has a 284-year orbit. So these, you know, these planets are expanding our consciousness exponentially. And that all happened around 2005, 2006. So the timing was interesting, because I was kind of just playing around with things. And I started putting those into the human design chart. And looking at those. But then I also started playing with the asteroids as well, and that took me on a whole other journey to start putting those into the chart and doing readings for people, including some of the asteroids. So
And
that was where I, and then I was introduced to Eleanor Haspel-Portner's work in 2005 as well on the multidimensional human design system. So pretty quickly I was doing multi-layer readings with minor planets, and that's a whole different thing. And then I also developed secondary progressions in astrology into the human design. That took me quite a few years of playing around into the human design.
For someone who doesn't know what a secondary progression astrological chart is, can you explain what that means in human design terms, maybe?
Yep.
Without that, or?
Yeah. So what it means, when we're born, we have this kind of, it's almost like our own personal evolutionary growth process. So over the period of our life, the planets, we progress the planets very, very, very slowly. And so that's the only chart layer that moves all the time. So the moon in that layer would move through 3 gates a year, and that would demonstrate the movement of your, what I call your emotional evolutionary edge. This is where your attention is going emotionally. The sun and earth move through a gate, or the combination of gates, around about every 6 years. So every 6 years you will have a new cycle. And in terms of your personality, because it's your sun, so you looking at how you're developing your personality. And I find that I don't do a lot of personal readings, but if people are coming to me for their first personal reading, they're almost always right at the end of one of those 6-year cycles, and they can feel something's changing and they want to get a handle on what that is. So that's an extraordinary tool to use, because it shows what's going on for you right now.
Okay. Well, I just turned 60, so I guess I'm at the end of a 6-year, just ended a 6-year cycle, right?
Not necessarily. So if you, like your line 2, for example, that would have shifted when you were around about 4 years old into a new. So it doesn't.
Oh,
okay.
It doesn't. It doesn't from birth.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily track like that.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. So yeah, I know that you have this. Is it pronounced Taraka? Is that how you pronounce your software that you use? And it has all these different things. And it's funny because just to tell a little story that I listened to your talk at the Human Design Conference 2 years ago in Colorado Springs, when you were broadcasting from, you were being
from here
and from Tim's in Australia, guys. I'm in Georgia, United States. At the time, though, I was in Colorado, which is, even a bigger time difference, right? So they had you talking at like 8 o'clock at night on a Saturday. Maybe it was 7, but it was a Saturday when we'd had sessions all day. We'd had a little break for dinner, and we came back after dinner, and you were talking about something with these layering on of charts, and the people in the room were like,
I know.
Nobody had any brain cells left.
I said to Karen, don't book me for the after dinner sessions. That's not what
you needed to be like first thing in the morning with a full cup of coffee, right? And it was just so funny because I knew about what you were talking about, but I didn't know it, and I was really interested in it. So I was really, and other people were just like, I have no idea what she's talking about. They were just like, but yeah, so it's really neat when you look at all these different ways that you can do it. And I'm wondering though how, because it could also become another way we just get in our head about things, right? Where we're looking at so many different things. So how do you suggest people use
It's a good question. It's a good question. And one of the things for me is that it doesn't, I would never ever do a reading for someone with just one chart, because it's just one aspect of your functioning. it's really limited and limiting, and it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. And I was saying to you before we came on the live stream, one of the things that I find is that, particularly for projectors, for example, I get projected, I get my personal readings are often the human design people or people interested in human design who come to me and say, I know this is supposed to work, but I can't make it work. And, you know, I know I'm supposed to wait for the invitation, but all my life I've manifested, you know, and I've tried not to, and my life's just fallen apart and I'm not having any fun anymore. When we look at those multiple layers, what we find is that there are some people who have manifesting aspects underneath or generating aspects in other layers of their multidimensional human design chart. So, for example, they might be a manifesting generator in their spiritual expression layer, which means that while they're still a projector primarily, they can, in the right situations, use that manifesting generator energy. And if you ask people not to use that, then life's so fun, right? Because there's some aspect of them that they're not using. So just to recognize how we shift and change through layers. The other thing that can happen is you can have people, I've got a client who's got 8 centers defined in a quad split, I think, so maybe 9 centers. Anyway, she's a quad split. But when we go to her spiritual expression layer, she's only got 1 projector channel. So to actually take that emotional manifester with, you know, 3 projector aspects and say, well, there's an incredible vulnerability and sensitivity under there. And so let's acknowledge that you're not that fixed as maybe that single chart might indicate, looking at all of those defined centers. So there's hidden layers there that you're living those. You are, just like you said before, you know, people they've often figured out a lot about their human design. When they find human design, they recognize a lot of it because they've figured it out, especially older people.
Yeah, especially people.
So a lot of people know this stuff. You know, it's an acknowledgement, and the thing that is incredibly important to me, and where I started out with the asteroids, is looking at what I call the feminine DNA, which is that if we look at the planets that are used to activate the gates in human design, they're almost entirely masculine archetypes.
Right.
And what you get when you go to the asteroids is you find all the feminine archetypes there. So you find Persephone and Psyche and Isis and Pallas Athene and Vesta, you know, the sacred vessel. What's sacred to you? What are you devoted to in this lifetime? So you find all these beautiful feminine archetypes there that can really inform your purpose, your sense of who you are in the world. And it helps to unravel a lot of disempowered thinking about who we are and how we're meant to function in the world. So it does take, you know, it's not like just getting your strategy and experimenting with it. It takes time to really get a sense of this, you know, much more deeper sense of who we are and how we function in the world, and more complex, because we are complex creatures, all of us.
Right. Yeah. And what I keep thinking about is how I love when you start talking in your blog posts about these feminine archetypes and the asteroids in the collective stories, because generally speaking, you know, your stories are what's going on in the world and how these different asteroids are bringing in this different energy that nobody else really is talking about. And there are so many times where I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. I could feel that happening, you know, where, you know, things are going on. And even just in human, like, and I think about it, it's like, we all know that in our human design chart, Chiron doesn't define a channel or anything, right? But everybody has their Chiron wound in this place. And we all learn about our Chiron return, and we know how much of an impact Chiron has on us. So it makes sense that all these other things would also have an impact. So when you're feeling the energy of it, do you really think about it in the sense of channels, or more just like the energy of how they impact the gates?
Yeah, more the energy of how they impact the gates, definitely. I think Ceres, which is spelt Ceres, she is a dwarf planet and she orbits between Mars and Jupiter. So she's a kind of a companion to Pluto. Anyway, I'm not sure. I might have talked about that at the conference I did the year before. So Ceres and Pluto are kind of twins. And she is sitting in the main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And for me, I will tend to give her definition status in the chart. And that doesn't really matter unless she's falling in a really important place. So, if she's in a bridge gate, obviously that's super important.
I think.
Yeah. So it's more the influence. We do a lot in my community. We do a lot of kind of just exploring so for example, when Mercury's retrograde, we might look at what gates it's passing over and what asteroids people have in those gates. So what kind of influences are they going to be naturally drawn to examining during the Mercury retrograde?
Oh, that's interesting, because right now we're entering into Mercury retrograde in a couple days.
Yeah, so you got to work with the energies and not try and make your brain do busy work with it.
Right.
Got to work when things are up for you, because that's when they're really available.
Yeah. Okay. So when you look at these, the different, all these different things, and you started doing this, did you get a lot of pushback from human design people?
Yep. Like also when I started doing human design coaching back in the day, I got a lot of pushback as well, because it wasn't the standard reading format that I was using. I've had pushback my whole career.
Well, you're fifth line, so right? It's kind of a given, right?
So I mean, even from Zeno, because Zeno was a purist, and that was what I loved about her, that she was a purist, and she gave me that pure skill of understanding structurally how the chart. I mean, the only reason I could go on and do the kind of innovation that I did and discovery that I did was because of the purity of what she passed to me in terms of understanding how the chart itself is structured and put together. So just simple things like, for example, in the root center, all the gates are either Cancer or Capricorn, except for gate 41. So just like this kind of understanding, a really deep understanding of the structure of the chart, that then allows you to go and play with that and let it tell even more secrets of how to use it, kind of thing. So she didn't like that. She said to me, "I'm not real sure about you using these asteroids." But I knew it was right. It was right for me. And even with astrology back then, most astrologers didn't want to use asteroids back then. If I go back to my early kind of marketing around there, a lot of it is very like, no, it's going to be okay if we look at them.
Right. So do you feel like, you're choosing to do this, was this something where, you're feeling the sacral response that, yes, I know Karen Curry Parker talks about how, there were all these things that her sacral was saying no to in regular human design, and they're teaching her, follow your sacral authority, but they're telling her, no, you can't do that.
Exactly. It used to drive me insane. I remember saying to someone one day, go and look at my chart and come back and tell me where I'm doing it wrong. I'm a heretic. I've got Mercury and Uranus going from the head to the ajna. Uranus, the great awakener, connects to higher mind. Mercury, the planet that is a bridge between higher mind and our way of thinking. I've got line 5 profile. You're like, just go look at my chart. Come tell me how I'm doing this wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, no, and that's the whole thing about nobody's here to tell anybody who they're doing it wrong. We're here to know ourselves, right?
Yeah. And also I just want to say, because I think there's an important point about that, which is that for me, it's really important. I came from having a really, a very rigorous education in what human design was. So everything that that my intuition guided me to from there was based on that education. And I think that I see stuff now where I think people don't have that education so much. And for me, that's a bit of a, like, I think it makes me a bit sad, because I feel like there's a loss of an understanding of the potential that gives people to get a deeper understanding of what human design really is. So yeah, I think you've got to balance the two sides of the brain, right? You've got to balance the side that has that rigorous understanding of what human design is, and then you can allow your intuition or whatever to, you know, the abstract circuitry to go play with that. They've got to work together.
Right. Yeah. Well, like I said, my experience with your blog posts were, they were like a college course, right? I felt like I learned so much about, you know, the mythology, the feminine archetypes that you would talk about. All this stuff was just like,
Yeah.
I want to know more of this. And so, did you have a big knowledge of feminine archetypes going into all of this? Like, is that something you had studied before, or did it develop from your interest in the asteroids and stuff?
No, I was a criminal lawyer.
Oh, my admin will love that. She's got a law. She's the law thing, Mary.
No, I didn't. But again, you know, if I look at my asteroids and where they sit, I've got, like, it's, of course, it's kind of like the whole goddess thing, or the whole, you know, reclaiming of the power of the feminine is so like in your face when you look at my chart. So it was just something that I used to get, you know, I got really badly discriminated against as a young lawyer in the 80s. And yeah, I think it kind of, I suppose in a sense, it grew out of that, even at school, even at school. So it grew out of that.
So where do you say, because this is something I guess I can pull up your chart again and look, but where do you say you see that feminine, the part you just said was in your chart about?
Yeah. So just two things. In my, should I share my chart visually?
Well, I mean, we could, it's in the thing.
I'll just say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I said about how I've got that Mercury Uranus. I've got that in the 63-4. So head to Ajna in the logical circuitry. And then that goes down, crosses over, and then you've got the 1762. So I've got Ceres in the 17, and I've got Psyche and some other things, Hecate, I think, in the 62. So Ceres, as I said, dwarf planet, gives definition. So that kind of innovative, higher mind, logical energy comes down, and it gets down to the throat via Ceres. So that's one place. And the other one is in the central channel, which I've got a lot of. I've got the moon in the 61, we're in the head center. And then I've got Ceres, which is the great mother, but also she was she brought the whole concept of transformation, rebirth, through the Eleusinian mysteries to humanity. So she's actually a more powerful transformative energy than Pluto is. And I've done a lot of work on that and talked about that at the conference. So anyway, she's sitting there with Vesta, which is, this is what you're devoted to in this lifetime. Like, this is your life's work in the 24. And then they come down to my throat where I've got the 23. So just those two.
So maybe what we should have you do, though, is in the comments, if you wouldn't mind sharing when we're done, like if you can just, or you can give it to me, or I just pop it in the comments in the from thing, a visual of, because your chart that I shared is just your basic human design chart, which is not going to show any of those placements. So that might be interesting for people to see what your
definitely
chart looks like. So in this book you've written about, it's called Asteroids, and tell me the name again. Here,
Oh.
you can show us. There we go. Asteroids in Human Design. There you go. Awakening the Feminine Archetype. So that, so if someone's going to use that, that's going to basically explain what each asteroid represents.
Yeah, well, I think there's about 20 of the main asteroids that I chose in there, plus the 4, what is generally called the Great Goddess asteroids, which is Ceres, Vesta, Pallas, and Juno. So I do those, and then another 20. And the first part of the book is me just taking people through the steps of understanding how to actually use them. And also in the community, the Love Your Design community, I've got the full asteroid course in there as well. So, plus all the other stuff that I do, I've got lessons on courses on all of that in there.
Two different things. You have your Love Your Design community where you can take the courses, and then you have the Taraka software where you can run the charts, right?
Yeah.
So I ran my spiritual, what is it called? My spiritual expression chart and my spiritual and dream chart. And I was noticing it was really interesting that in both of those, I come out as a self-projected projector. And in my, when you ran it, is that what you got? Because at first I think okay. Because
no, I had the 23rd.
Okay. So, and I am a emotional projector with a triple split that in the past I've always thought, I always feel like that self-projected projector, and I thought it was because of my splits, and that was the only part that was my center connects to my throat. So, but that really made sense to me, but I don't really claim to understand what either of those charts represent. So I guess the other
one of the things I find interesting looking at your if we look at all of those charts, but if we just look at, I've got you as an 8-1, having an 8-1 in your standard chart, right? And you've also got that channel. In fact, that's the only channel you have in your spiritual expression chart, which means that 8-1 channel is fundamental to your purpose more than your other channels that you have. Which you've got another 2, right? But those channels are part of your kind of day-to-day life, but they're not so fundamental to your purpose as the 8-1 channel.
That really resonates too. Yeah. That creative role model, speaking from who I am, not copying anybody, all of that really, really does resonate. So the spiritual expression chart is done with what? So I could tell part of that was my personality side, and then the other side is done with a progression to what?
I don't want to go into like too much technical detail, but basically it's 88 degrees of the moon post-natal. So in we have the 88 degrees of the moon before you were born. That's the design layer. So in the multidimensional, it's kind of playing around with that 88 degrees, the sun and the moon pre and post-natal. And it's based on information that Ra was given in the Revelation, but he actually didn't go and do anything with it. But Eleanor Haspel-Portnett created this system based on the information. And she worked with Ra originally for about 6 months.
I recognize her name.
Yeah, they put the original parts of it together, and then she just kept working on it from there. In Genetic Matrix, they've got about 30, I think there's 32 charts in total. And I found that I used to do readings with all 32 chart layers back in the day. But yeah, exactly right. So the 4 or 3 additional chart layers that I have in Taraka are what I find the most useful. I just think if we can grasp what's in those, the other chart layers kind of fall into place behind that.
Right.
Who wants to be, it used to exhaust me doing 32 charts.
Right. Well, I know in traditional human design, they have a sleep chart that's the rave chart, but your spiritual dream chart is different than that. But is it calculated the same way?
It's calculated the same way, but it's in a 64 gate matrix rather than the 15 gate matrix of the rave chart.
Okay, cool. So when people want to get started with this, what's the, like, you know, because this is a new thing for most people, and I'm sure a lot of
Yeah.
people are interested, but they don't know where to start. So I'm sure your book would be helpful, but you know, besides,
Yeah, I think the book's helpful, but people really need to, I think, work through the course. What I did was, so on my 20th anniversary, or close to my, it was my nodal return for my business. So around about 19 years, I decided to set the community up. So I took all the courses that I had in available to buy, and I put them all inside the community. And people can access Taraka from inside the community as well, the full Taraka software. And so basically I'm turning up pretty much every day and just, you know, helping people to grasp things. And there's two streams in the community. There's what I call the experiment stream, which is experimenting with understanding your human design chart. But it's probably going to be, you know, like when you say you read the blog and you like all this stuff, I find that when I do talk about human design, I think because of how I understand it structurally and how things work within the structure. So I'm not just talking about the keynotes that are given for the gates or the channels or the types or whatever. I'm actually speaking from the intelligence of the chart itself. And you know, I work with the Kabbalah and the I Ching, like all those 4 structural elements. So the experiment stream is about moving people slowly and gradually through an understanding so that they can really tap into the intelligence and the wisdom of the chart itself, rather than operating from the kind of, from the keywords. And then the other stream is what I call the emergent stream. And that's the additional stuff. So that's where we explore the asteroids and the multiple layer charts and the holographic, that moving chart. So there's 2 streams there. And you can't work with the add-ons, the emergent stuff, without really having a little bit at least of an understanding of the structure of the chart, because it just doesn't make sense. It's just basically, I'm just telling you things and you believe them or not. But to actually be able to really look at the chart and understand it, it's important to have that, to be able to tap into the intelligence of the chart.
Yeah, and I think sometimes even just the standard, you know, classic body graph understanding is so much, there's so much to that then it gets a little intimidating for people to think about now adding in all these other layers, right? I know when I look at the list of all these placements of all these asteroids of mine, I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. So what?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, because so I do really immersive courses. So we've, you know, I've got videos, I've got worksheets where you go and do personal reflection on things. You know, there's quizzes there so you can check, but plus also we've got what I call the social hub, or the forums where people can ask questions. We have live calls where people can talk about the stuff in the courses. So the whole idea of it, and I set it up the way I did because I wanted people to be able to do any course at any time, not feel that they have to, you know, I don't run them live. They're there. You can come and ask me a question anytime about any of the courses. So I just wanted people to be able to take them in at their own pace and be able to get context and guidance as they're moving through it. And I think because of how I do it in tiny little bits. So, you know, you get a little video and then so you can actually kind of integrate it, even with an open Ajna, hopefully. I try and make it as experiential as possible, put it that way.
That's what, you know, one of the best things, because I was already, I was already 53 almost when I found Human Design, or it found me. And this idea of my open ajna and how that operates has completely saved me. I would probably be getting treated for early stage dementia or something, because there's so many times where something is not there. And then I'll be talking to somebody and I can tell them all this stuff because they pull it out of me, right? But like I was just thinking about how I listened to this wonderful call from about 7 months ago that Karen had you on her podcast, Karen Curry Parker, and I posted it in
that was a few years ago.
It said 7 months ago. They must have just
that was like
that must have they put it on YouTube.
Was probably 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say at least.
Really?
Maybe longer. I think I was in Sydney. I think I was living in Sydney, so it's probably 5 years ago.
Okay, well then you probably don't remember what you said either, but I remember listening to it and thinking, oh, this is really cool. I should talk about this. And now I'm like trying to remember what half of the things were because, you know, I'm trying to pull them out. It's not being pulled out.
Yeah.
So,
that's not your job, right?
Right. I do know that one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, which I didn't give you any warning of, so, but you have a defined ajna, hopefully it's still there, is the idea of, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the 2027 mutation. And I know that you and Karen had talked about that and the beautiful vision that Karen has for it versus the kind of apocalyptic traditional human design raw story. And then I know you made a comment that said the astrology does not support Ra's vision of this, like, you know, apocalyptic thing that's going to happen. And I'm just wondering, as we're moving closer in the future, if there's anything with what you're seeing coming up in this next, you know, it's the time of year we're all looking at, like what's happening next year. Are there any thoughts you have on the future that you might want to share with us with no preparation? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I actually opened my 2004, 2005 notes in front of me because I thought that's something that it would be great to touch on. But do you know, my thing that I rant about a lot in my blog is this idea of the Armageddon, you know, that it's so built into our understanding of reality. And for most cultures and for most of human history, the idea of us heading towards an Armageddon just was not, it wasn't a thing. So in this little bubble of a couple of thousand years of human history, in the little bubble of Western, you know, Christian culture or the Abrahamic religions, we have this idea that we're headed to a cliff and we're all going to fall off the cliff unless the Messiah turns up. And that thinking is so strong. I see it so strongly in the idea of 2027 that there's this cliff, you know, and we're going to fall over it and everything's going to be different forever. But that's not how things work. You know, we work in cycles and we work together to adapt to the circumstances that are in front of us. And I think a lot of this idea of, you know, I think there's 2 problems I have with 2027, 3 probably. There's probably more, but let's stick it to 3. Like, let's keep it at 3. One is the idea that something shockingly horrible is going to happen, right? We're going to hit sometime in 2027, something you know, the world's going to fall apart, which, no. The second thing is that, can you hear the mower?
No.
Good, excellent, because it's quite loud for me. I'm glad you can't. The second thing is the idea that something is going to happen magically that's going to save us. And I see those 2 ideas really deeply threaded through the human design conversation. And I find it frustrating, I suppose, because basically the human design chart is based upon 4 structural components, right? The chakras, the I Ching, the Kabbalah, and astrology, all of which are empowering us to be able to take charge of the moment, to come and work together cooperatively to create a new reality. And that's really what I see in the transits is happening now. It's like, well, it's time for us to give up the old hierarchy of the communal circuitry. We won't lose the communal circuitry. Why would we want to lose that? Like, our communities are precious to us, but the structure, the hierarchical structure of that communal circuitry is going to shift, and it'll go back to being more supportive rather than extractive and, you know, based on colonialism. But the third thing then is that 2027 is the date is simply based on Pluto returning to the position it was in when Uranus was discovered. So, which is in February 2027 when Pluto hits gate 41, line 4. And that's just another cycle. Pluto's going to do another 284 years, and then it's going to come back to that position again. So it is the end of something and the beginning of something. And yeah, I'm not a big fan of this idea that there's going to be some falling off cliff. However, obviously things are changing dramatically, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
They need to change.
I know there was something in that conversation where you talked about the idea of change, and I did watch, I think I was watching, I don't know, I watched too many YouTube videos this week, and I think my husband's gone, so I can have him on in the background while I'm doing stuff, whatever, too. But I was listening to Chetan Parkin and his wife. They had their 2024, video where they were talking about things, and they were talking about there are several times where, a couple times at least in the year, where we have the channel 3536 defined, and I don't remember exactly what it's defined. Yes. And then also 2551, and they were talking about how this is going to really impact us as we are meant to find, like, be initiated by this change and chaos and all of this stuff. And I'm not using
Kathy, even the wording of be initiated really bothers me, because it's like something's being done to us.
Yeah, I'm
we're going to be initiated.
That might be my
the idea that something's happening to us, I think is really disempowering.
Okay.
It's us. This is us. We're doing this, we need to think about how we're engaging with our, just on an everyday level. How is each one of us engaging with reality? Those two channels are Neptune's going to go into the 25 in April, and the North Node and Chiron will be in the 51. And that's actually a really big moment. That's the 10th of April, I think, around about the 10th of April. And I see that as simply the end of something that we've been working on really hard, which is dealing with all the trauma, which isn't what Neptune's been doing in the 36. It's been helping us to actually find the places where our light has been, our genius, our beautiful spark of brilliance has been traumatized, and it hasn't felt safe for it to be in the world. So later, when the North Node goes to the 35, I think Jupiter's there as well at some stage, we have a really big completion of and a switch from choosing experiences that are about healing trauma, or even repeating stupid things that we've done over and over, but healing trauma and starting to step into what that channel's really about, which is our capacity to co-create reality together by pulling out the real purpose of our experiences, and that being a really creative, rather than, kind of going back to the past, healing kind of energy. But the 2551, for me, that channel, that tiny, tiny little, apparently minor little channel that sits there between the heart center and the collective and the G center, is a pathway that takes us from how we constellate our identity in terms of our communities and our families, how we find, where our value is, what we consider, when are we being approved of and when we're not. So all of those communal aspects of the heart center, and we begin to constellate our identity more in accordance with the G center, which is much more about our brilliance. Just, with the 1-8, right? I bring my brilliance and it finds its place in the world.
Right.
So that 2551 activation is really just giving us a pathway to work to work through the last bit of trauma of letting go of thinking that we are who our tribe tells us who we are, to moving into the collective energy. And the individual circuitry, you know, with is it the cross of the sleeping phoenix, whatever that is. The whole point of having individuality is not so you can stand alone, but so that you can be a creative and, you know, crucial, irreplaceable member of the collective.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like everything is happening for us in a way that is really enabling us all, whether we have the 1-8 or not, to just really say, I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to be me, because that's the only way we can have authentic relationships. And like, instead of seeing it as selfishness, as we were always taught, like, oh, you know, we used to admire the people who was always giving, you know, to the point of like, you know, the book, The Giving Tree, you know, like
I don't, but yeah, but I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
There's a famous children's book, and I actually just had to tell the mom that no, that's not what it means. That's, you know, it's not a good ending, because the tree's like, take my limbs. The little boy keeps coming, and she keeps giving her parts of herself, like, to take care of the boy who's there. And at the end, he sits on the stump because he's cut her down, right? And they're like, oh, it's such a good story of nurturing and giving to others. And I'm like, no, it's a story of when you keep giving and you don't take care of yourself, there's nothing left of you, right? Some people still don't get that, but so, yeah.
I used to, I know that the idea of sacrificing for your children, I remember having an argument with my mum when I was a teenager and saying to her, but mum, at what point, which generation gets the benefit? You know, when does the sacrifice stop and we say, oh, finally it paid off, this generation gets the benefit of it? No, we all just become less and less and less.
And now more and more people are choosing not to have children, and because they don't want to do it. And I've just watched there was a little reel of somebody's kid crying, and she's like maybe 8 years old, and she's like, I don't want to be an adult. I just want to be 4 again. And the mom was like, me too, hon, me too. And she's like, I never want to grow up. It's no fun. It's like living in a prison. And she's going on this whole thing. And it's like, because that's how we live our lives, right? So many of us, I don't do that anymore, but you know, we're living in this idea of, you know, what do other people want from us instead of.
And it's important that you live how you live now. And it's important that, you know, everyone who's listening is living as much as possible and more like that. Because, you know, one of the examples I give is, if you go back, like in the late 70s, I started doing yoga. And no one knew what yoga was back then. You'd say to people, I'm going to a yoga class, and they'd be like, oh, what's that? You know, like, but, you know, now I can just get an app and, you know, start it up and do my yoga at home. And, you know, I think that ideas that even now seem like a little bit edgy and unusual, they seep into the mainstream and become normalized. And so even though it can feel, you know, selfish perhaps to do the kind of work that we're doing, it does spread out and become more and more normalized. And I think that's really, even though we might just be sitting at home having a cup of tea and doing some personal work, it's really powerful and really important.
Yeah. So, you know, kind of going back to your story, we were talking about like how human design impacted you. And I feel like I just had an idea. There's something else that I feel like you said you were going to say 3 things, and maybe we didn't say all 3, but or maybe I just didn't count anymore. But there's also at the very beginning when I was asking you how human design impacted you, and I'm wondering if you feel like the person you are now would, you know, compared to who you were before human design, do you feel like you would even recognize her? Like,
who I am now is so far beyond who I ever imagined, and not kind of in an aspirational sense, not like, oh, I wish I could be that person, because I didn't ever think about being the person I am now. Never occurred to me that I could be the person I am now. It's just so far outside of what I ever imagined, who I ever imagined I was going to be.
Yeah, that's kind of, and I've only been doing this nowhere near as long as you, but that's how I feel as well. And how, with as much as you've done now with this, how have the people who have known you all along responded to that? Like your family or friends who've known you for 30 years, or like, do they just not pay attention to that part of you? Have they come along with you?
That's a kind of hard question. I think my family I had about 10 years away from, because I needed to be, I've got a lot of tribal circuitry, and it was too sticky for me to be around them. I just couldn't do the work I needed to do. So I moved a long way away from them and didn't have much contact with them for quite a while. And I think sometimes it's really important to make that choice for ourselves. So it gave me the capacity to just explore and experiment and find a different kind of way to be myself. And then I was able to be more solid and stable in that sense of who I was. And then it was fine for me to go back to my family. What I found originally, even from when I was a kid, they just thought I was super weird. But now I think they tend, so I'm thinking about my siblings and my parents when I'm saying this, they tend to think that they can see that who I am is good, but they don't necessarily understand how I got here, in a sense. But there is this almost like a curiosity now to and wanting to be the recipient, I suppose, in a way, of everything that I've been able to achieve in that time in terms of who I am now. But all my friends, I mean, they've either dropped away or they've come along with me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people will have that experience as well, I'm sure. And my kids, right? My kids, I love what, they've had human design in their life, their whole life. They know nothing about their human design. I didn't ever talk to them about it. I thought if they wanted to know, they'll come to me. But they're just amazing people, because I knew how to speak to them to get them to pay attention to what was important to them.
And how many kids do you have?
Two.
And how old are they?
My son, who's visiting at the moment, is 29, and my daughter's 25.
Okay. So I would ask you what their type is, but you don't go by type, so you probably don't.
Well, they're in their standard chart. They're both generators.
Okay. Yeah. And I don't know if we made that clear, that because of all the things you look at, the standard types don't necessarily fit for how you work with people.
Sometimes they're spot on, but other times we need to play around and consider things a little bit differently. And that's something that people will recognize in themselves rather than feel that it's being imposed on them as well.
Right. Well, it looks like we are already at the top of the hour here. So I have really enjoyed what we were talking about. I don't know if you said that when I was saying, what was it that you were saying? You said, I'm going to say 3 things, but only 3 things. And then you just started talking, and I didn't pay attention to whether we finished that.
I said 3. I might have said 3. I can't even remember what question you asked now.
Either. That's why I was just like, if it was meant to be said, it was said. If it wasn't, then
yeah.
Okay. And I noticed there were a couple of just little comments, but I don't see any questions in the chat. So I wanted to thank you. I know this was tricky to get the timing worked out and stuff, so I appreciate that. And so if people want to connect with you, I know you've talked about different courses and stuff. So loveyourdesign.com is the best place, right? And we'll put that in the notes here. And then if there's anywhere, you're on Facebook, but mostly it's sign up for her blog, sign up for her emails. It's really worth getting. You don't even have to, it's no college fees for it, but you will become very educated in feminine archetypes. So I wanted to thank you and thank everybody who's watching. And every week we share stories of how my guests have come to understand themselves in a more loving and empowering way through the lens of human design. How you think and speak about yourself matters. Human design can show you the reframe of not only your own story, but how the story you tell yourself about yourself, but about your relationships. If you are ready to start living a better story, I'd love to help you, guide you through the process of embodying who you came here to be. To work with me, you can set up a free discovery call at kathybashanko.com. Thanks again, Kim. And we are going to say bye.
Thanks, Kathy.